Welcome to the Mrs. Beastly channel.
Blood Moon Chronicles, Chapter 24, The Menu of Doom. Okay, so we finally get to dinner, right? I mean, after 23 chapters of running screaming into the void, finding a healed version of myself in a wall, and being told that dinner is on me, logic would suggest a quiet meal where we talk about feelings or maybe how many people died this week. Instead, Bubba tries to order ribs from a vending machine that's been welded shut with human teeth. Don't ask. Please don't ask. I tried to explain it and he just nodded like he understood, but I know he didn't, because the last time he asked about something he didn't understand I had to draw him a diagram on his arm with a Sharpie, and now he keeps scratching it off. We realized we didn't escape the loop, we just paused it, and Victor knows it. He calls us on a payphone that shouldn't exist anymore, just laughing while static floods my brain like someone shoved a fork into a socket and turned the breaker switch to on. We try to leave town, but the roads are made of glass, and every time we cut our tires, the moon laughs louder. It's not over. That was always the joke, wasn't it? Let me set the scene, because I know you're thinking what I'm thinking. A diner? Really? In a world where reality is held together by duct tape and spite, we decided to go to the Golden Spoon, which sounds like a place that serves soup made from old bones, but apparently they have a menu. Bubba was so excited he started doing that weird shuffle dance with his boots off again. Don't judge him. He's been trapped in a nightmare for 3 weeks straight, and if dancing keeps him sane, then I'll be the first one to admit I'm not going to stop him, even though I really wish he wouldn't knock over the napkin dispenser. The inside was dimly lit, like someone had forgotten to pay the electric bill, but the generator decided to stay on anyway, just for spite. Mike sat in a booth with his back against the wall, because that's what you do when you're paranoid. Sit where you can see everyone and nowhere can hide behind you, unless it's under the table, which is also bad, because then they can grab your ankles. I ordered something generic, I don't even remember what, maybe some fries or a soda or just a plate of air, to prove that we're still alive in this reality, but really we're not, because the waitress brought out a tray with a single glass of water and it was warm. Not room temperature warm, like the kind you get when it's been sitting on the counter for hours, no, body warm, like someone had just held it in their hand until it reached peak efficiency at being gross. Bubba looked at me and said, "Well, this is cozy," which I think was supposed to be a joke, but he's not that funny anymore, because the last time he told a joke involved a dog and a toilet, and now we're all traumatized by the memory of it, so I just nodded and took a sip. The water tasted like copper coins, which honestly wasn't surprising given where we are. Then Bubba decided to get his own food from the vending machine in the corner, because apparently he thinks that's a better option than letting us starve or whatever. He started pressing buttons on the keypad, but nothing happened except for this weird grinding noise, and then the glass front of the machine started shaking like it was vibrating with rage. I told him to stop, that maybe we shouldn't touch anything anymore, since last time we touched something inanimate it turned into a shapeshifter. But he ignored me, because Bubba has never been one to listen when you say no unless there's a gun involved. Suddenly the machine spat out a tray with 3 ribs on them, and they were still moving, wiggling slightly like they were trying to crawl back onto the bone. I watched it happen in real time, and I couldn't even look away, because that would be admitting we're not in control anymore, which is a concept we've been trying to avoid since Chapter 7 when Dave told us that the arch isn't just a door. So anyway, after eating the ribs, which were surprisingly tender given they were basically still alive, we decided to leave, because what's the point of celebrating if you're going to die in a booth later? We walked out into the night, and it was quiet, too quiet for a town that had been invaded by vampires last week. The street stretched out ahead of us like a long, dark tunnel with no end, which is usually how I feel about my life at this point, but now it's actually literal. I tried to walk past the corner store and found myself back where I started after exactly 4 steps, which made me question whether I was hallucinating or if the universe had just decided to be petty for once. Bubba kicked a rock and it rolled back toward us like it had been magnetized by some evil force field designed specifically to annoy pedestrians. That's when we realized we didn't escape the loop, we just paused it, and Victor knows it. Then the payphone rang, not on a table or in a booth, but hanging from a hook outside the diner, dangling slightly as if waiting for us to come back inside and pick it up, because that's how these things work. There's always a trap involved, even when you think you're safe. I went over there first because I was tired of Bubba trying to punch random objects. The receiver felt cold in my hand, like it had been stored in a freezer for centuries. I put it to my ear and heard static, lots of it, like an old TV set with no signal but louder, vibrating through my skull until I thought maybe my brain was going to crack open like an egg yolk on a hot griddle. Then a voice cut through, smooth as velvet and just as suffocating. "Hello, Rhonda." It was Victor. Of course it was. He sounded calm, almost relaxed, like he wasn't currently running a monster factory in some pocket dimension outside of normal reality. "Enjoy the view?" he asked, his laugh echoing around us like he was standing right behind me. Which he totally was, because that's how these villains work. They never give you a straight answer until they've already won. I tried to hang up, but the cord wouldn't disconnect. It just stretched longer and longer until I thought maybe it was made of rubber or something else entirely that defied physics. "You think this is funny?" I said into the phone, my voice cracking because I was scared for real for once and not just pretending, because horror tropes demand fear from protagonists at least twice per chapter. "Victor, stop playing games." He laughed again, a sound like tinkling glass or maybe broken porcelain being stepped on by boots filled with nails. "Games? No, Rhonda, we're not playing anymore. We're waiting." Then the line went dead and I was left holding a phone that suddenly felt heavy in my hand, like it weighed 50 pounds but had no mass. Bubba came over to me then, his face pale under the streetlights which were flickering on and off as if trying to communicate something important but couldn't decide what message to send first. "What did he say?" he asked, lighting a cigar with trembling hands, because apparently even he has limits when reality starts glitching. I told him nothing, because there was no point in explaining that the universe had just decided we were still prisoners and the gate had been locked again. We tried to leave town, but the roads are made of glass, and every time we cut our tires, the moon laughs louder. "It's not over." That was always the joke, wasn't it? I looked up at the sky where the blood moon hung like a festering wound against the dark canvas of night, glowing red as if bleeding from an open vein that had been opened just for us specifically. The headlights of my car cut through the darkness, but they didn't illuminate anything beyond the hood, which made sense, because why would you shine light on something when it might be looking back at you? I started the engine and tried to drive forward, but the road was slippery, like ice. Even though there hadn't been snow for months, my tires screeched as I turned them toward the exit sign, which looked more like a warning label than anything else, reading, "Warning! Do not enter," in letters that were too small to read until you were right on top of it. Then the tires cut. Not from hitting something hard, but just giving up, dissolving into smoke or maybe dust, because who knows anymore. I stopped the car and got out, my legs shaking so badly I could barely stand. The moon seemed to pulse faster now, and if that wasn't creepy enough, then consider this. Every time it pulsed, something broke nearby. A streetlight shattered into shards of glass on the pavement. A car alarm went off somewhere far away but sounded closer than it should have been, because sound doesn't work right anymore when the moon is doing its thing. I felt like crying but didn't want to give in to that urge, because then Bubba would make a joke and I'd probably cry even harder, so I just stood there, hands on my hips, staring at nothing until I realized the ground beneath me wasn't solid anymore. It was made of pixels or maybe static, and every step I took sent little ripples through it like water. "It's not over," I said aloud, testing to see if anyone was listening. No one answered, because there was no one else around except for Bubba, who had walked behind me without me noticing him moving again. He looked tired, his face lined with exhaustion that hadn't been there before dinner, or maybe it had and we just hadn't noticed yet, because horror movies like to save the fatigue for the final act, when you're supposed to feel sorry for the protagonist, but really I'm just annoyed at having to deal with this nonsense again after everything else. "We didn't escape," he said, his voice low and gravelly, as if speaking too loudly might alert whatever was listening nearby. "Did we?" I nodded, because that's what you do when someone asks a question you already know the answer to, but need them to say it for you so you can confirm your worst suspicions are correct. Victor had won again, or maybe he never lost in the first place, and this whole thing was just his way of keeping us entertained while he built something bigger than all of us combined. We sat there for a while, watching the moon laugh louder with every passing second, until I realized it wasn't actually laughing, but making some kind of sound that sounded like laughter from far away, because distance doesn't work right either, and we were trapped in a loop where everything is connected but nothing ever happens unless you're ready to give up your humanity entirely. Then Bubba lit another cigar, the flame illuminating his face for just a second before he blew it out again into the darkness. "Well," he said, "at least we got dinner." I laughed, because that's what you do when someone says something stupid in a situation like this, and he smiled back at me with eyes full of hope that wasn't entirely gone but was fading fast like a candle under water. We decided to stay put until morning, which sounded good on paper until we realized there is no morning anymore, or maybe it just doesn't come for us specifically because the universe has decided to make exceptions for people who are destined to die in loops forever. I leaned back against the car, closing my eyes for a moment and thinking about what Sarah would say if she were here right now. Probably something sarcastic like "I told you so," or maybe she'd just roll her eyes at us both, because that's what big sisters do when their little siblings make bad decisions over and over again until they finally get it. But she wasn't here, so instead I opened my eyes and looked at the road ahead, where the glass shards still gleamed in the moonlight like tiny stars fallen from the sky to mark our final resting place if we ever made it out of this mess, which we probably wouldn't, because that's how these stories go. They start with hope and end with despair. And then the payphone rang again, right there on its hook outside the diner door where Victor had left it hanging like bait for a fish that hadn't learned to swim yet. I didn't pick it up this time, but I heard him whispering through the static anyway, saying something about chapter 25, which made me wonder if he was reading from a script or if he knew what we were going to do next, because sometimes villains are smarter than they look, and maybe that's why they always win in the end. Please stay tuned for the next installment of Blood Moon Chronicles. Oh, by the way, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I'll see you soon, my friends.